Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Cherry Hill Public Schools Board of Education meeting for November 9th, 2021. Public notice of this meeting pursuant to the Open Publics Meeting Act has been given by the Board Secretary on November 2nd, 2021 in the following manner. Posted notice on the school bulletin board at the Administration Building, transmitted to the Courier Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Clerk of Cherry Hill Township. Please stand with me with Kevin Salvatorelli, who will take us through the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I will now turn it over to Mrs. Sugars for roll call.
Mrs. Arroyo,
Here.
Mrs. Stratton. Here. Ms. Friedel.
Here.
Mrs. Matlack,
Here.
Mr. Avadia,
Here.
Mrs. Schultz,
Here.
Ms. Stern,
Here.
Mrs. Tong,
Here.
Mrs. Neary.
Here. Okay, we don't have any board recognitions this evening, I believe, Dr. Malash, but we do have a presentation this evening, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. Good evening to everyone. We are here in November, and I'm very excited to introduce to everyone Dr. Mahan, who will then, I believe, do a little introduction for Mrs. Schmid-Sadwin and for Mrs. Holmgren. We're going to do an update presentation on 2020/2021 assessment results. For those of you who continue to follow what goes on with the board, this is an annual presentation that we do in November. I'm always excited that Mrs. Schmid-Sadwin, Mrs. Holmgren can join us. They work in our Office of Research and Assessment, and Mrs. Holmgren is our teacher coordinator. So they work throughout the 19 schools in the district. Dr. Mahan, is there anything specific that you'd like to say in introducing our colleagues?
No, Dr. Malash, I think you've done a great job. I would like to point out, though, that some of our viewers online are indicating that they are unable to hear. I am working behind the scenes on that with Mr. Plavinsky, but I wanted to alert the board if they see a message in the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to Mrs. Schmid-Sadwin and Mrs. Holmgren for the 2021 assessment result presentation.
Hello, thank you for having us here tonight. And tonight, Faith Holmgren and I will be presenting the results of the standardized assessments administered during the 2020-2021 school year, as well as the SAT results of the class of 2021. Faith will also provide a sneak peek at the state-required fall Start Strong testing that was just completed at the end of October, with more to come in the following months. I guess you can consider Faith's portion our trailer, with hopes that you will want to see the movie to follow. Dr. Malash, may we bring popcorn?
Yes, Ms. Schmid-Sadwin, absolutely yes.
Our first results that we're going to present are the Access for Ells. It is the statewide assessment for English language learners, and the testing window is earlier than the other state tests. Most Access for Ells testing in 2020 was completed prior to Cherry Hill's move to remote learning due to COVID-19, which is why you see 2020 results here. You may have read national news about the concern that English language learners were particularly hurt by the pandemic. It seems that here in Cherry Hill, that doesn't seem to be the case. Although the percentage of students proficient in 2021 was lower than in 2020 at 16.5%, it was about the average of the two prior years, which we consider pretty good. A few ESL facts. The national news also questions the validity of English language learner results in some states because of low participation rates. That also doesn't seem to be the case in Cherry Hill, where 380 students completed the Access for Ells for a 95% participation rate. This is even though there were still many students who opted for remote instruction in the spring, and the test was only administered in person. 50 students were exited from the ESL program, and the number of students receiving ESL services continues to grow at 388 students a few days ago, and we expect to have 20 ESL teachers by December 2021. Moving on to the dynamic learning maps, or the DLM. The DLM is the alternate assessment for students with the most significant intellectual disabilities. The top two segments on this graph are the students who are at target or advanced, and those are who are considered proficient. The DLM results in 2021 were comparable to the prior year's results, with the 2020 canceled due to all students moving to remote learning because of COVID-19, and the DLM is only administered in person. We also had an 87% participation rate for the 60 students who were eligible to take the DLM, which also seems pretty good since many students opted for remote instruction at the time of testing. Okay, I thought it was me. Here we go. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the SATs. For the SATs, we always look at the SAT results of the cohort of the graduating classes. Participation fell for the class of 2021 at both East and West due to the cancellation of test administrations, as well as colleges waiving the requirement that students provide SAT scores with their applications. Here are Cherry Hill High School East participation rates, with about a 13 percentage point drop in participation from the prior class, going from about 89% for the class of 2020 to 76% for the class of 2021. Moving on to the scale scores, the 2021 East scale scores are higher than the prior year cohort, and the East math SAT scores continue to be slightly higher than the reading scores. Class of 2021 scores were 601 for reading and 616 for math. Moving on to West, as I said before, the participation fell at both high schools. Here are West participation rates with about an 18 percentage point drop in participation from the prior class, going from 67% to 49% in the class of 2021. Looking at the SAT scale scores, West reading and math scores are at or above the prior class's average scores. It's interesting that West reading SAT scores have been higher than math for the past two classes or cohorts. The reading scores in class of 2021 were 542, with math scores being 524. Moving on to PSATs. PSATs are administered in Cherry Hill to all grade 10 and 11 students, with the district paying for the cost of the tests. They are administered in October, so they were administered during the 2019-2020 school year. Participation in the 2020 to 2021 school year dropped at both East and West. But keep in mind that the administration of the PSAT, at the time of the administration of the PSAT, all Cherry Hill students were participating in remote learning. That means that any student that took the PSAT was bussed in specifically to take the test. Considering that, the participation rate drop doesn't seem all that unexpected. Here are East participation rates, which dropped about 32 percentage points from the prior year, from 98% to 66%. Looking at the scores, the PSAT scores were higher in 2020 2021 than in the prior year. Unlike the SAT, for the PSAT, East reading scores have been higher than Math for the past 2 years. The PSAT scores in 2021 were reading at 550 and Math at 527. Moving on to West. As I said, participation in the 2021 school year dropped at both East and West, and here are West participation rates, which dropped about the same as East, 33 percentage points from the prior year, from 97% to 64%. Moving on to the scale scores. West PSAT scale scores were higher this year than the last 2 years. And as with the SAT, reading scores have been higher than Math for the past 4 years. The reading scores in 2021 were 467 for reading and 453 for Math. Okay, those were the results of the assessments that we administered during the 2020-2021 school year. You can move to the next slide, it was okay. As well as the class of 2021 SAT results. So here to discuss the fall 2021 Start Strong testing is Faith Holmgren, our teacher coordinator and district test coordinator. Faith?
Thanks, Val.
Good evening. In the first portion of this presentation, as Val mentioned, she shared with you the assessment data that we currently have available. I will now provide you with a brief overview of the Start Strong assessment, of which the data will be available to parents mid-December and then presented to the board as per the DOE requirement in January. A little information about Start Strong. It was developed in response to disruption to education due to the pandemic. It provided our schools the opportunity to assess students at the very beginning of the school year. Our window here in Cherry Hill ran from September 27th to October 22nd. It was based on the prior year academic standards. Therefore, if I was a 4th grade student, I was assessed on the end of 3rd grade standards. The students were also provided 60 minutes to take each assessment, and here you can see which content areas and grades were assessed. So how will Start Strong inform instruction going forward? Start Strong data provided teachers and administrators with almost instant access to student results. The students were placed in one of 3 support levels based on their performance. Either strong support needed, some support needed, or less support needed. The teachers also have access to the questions their students were asked, how their students responded, as well as what the correct answer was to the question. The teachers were also able to run a valuable report which determined how their class performed on questions linked to specific standards. So how are we addressing curriculum and instructional planning using this Start Strong data? Starting with the teachers. They're establishing supports and interventions for their students using this data. How, you ask? Here's a specific example. I am going into the schools and having PLC meetings with teachers and principals. First, guiding them on how to access the Start Strong reports. And once they are comfortable with accessing these reports, then looking at the data and beginning to create specific instructional plans based on their students' performance. Along with PLC meetings I'm conducting, teachers are also focusing their instructional planning time on using the data to enhance student learning. To provide you with another specific example, teachers are creating I&E groups based upon the Start Strong data to target instruction. Moving on to administrators, what steps are administrators taking? They are using their data teams in their buildings to make decisions that promote positive student outcomes. How? I'm attending the level meetings across all 3 levels and walking the principals through the step-by-step process of accessing the Start Strong data so that they are able to go back into their schools and have a strong understanding of using the Start Strong data with their teachers. A specific example, last week I met with the administrative team at Carusi, which included all administrators as well as guidance counselors. I took them through the process in the Pearson platform of accessing the data. We then looked at the data together, and they are now meeting with teachers and developing plans to respond to the data they looked at. Administrators are also allocating resources, such as time, to allow teachers to plan together to address the information they're gathering from this Start Strong data. And finally, administrators are also determining the use of Sr2 funds based upon their findings when looking at this Start Strong data as well. This next slide provides you with specific examples of questions that guide the conversations that I have with teachers, as well as questions that principals are having with their staff based upon this Start Strong data. I won't read this entire slide to you, but just to highlight a few of the guiding questions. What can and can't the data tell us about the needs of our students? What other data might we use to verify the outcomes of the Start Strong data? And finally, stay tuned. Here you will find a timeline of when the Start Strong data will be released, as I briefly referred to at the beginning of my portion of this assessment. The ISRs become available to the district electronically November 29th. The summary results will become available to the district electronically December 6th. We will post the ISRs, or individual student reports, to Genesis via the parent portal the week of December 13th. And finally, we will then provide this information on the Start Strong data to the Board of Ed, as I mentioned, being required by the Department of Ed, mid-January. Any questions?
Thank you, Faith. Thank you, Mrs. Holmgren and Mrs. Schmid-Sadwin, for an excellent presentation. I do just want to remind everyone of what Mrs. Schmid-Sadwin said at the beginning. She started off by saying that she was starting the presentation off with data that we had that was current, and then Faith was going to end with the trailer. And I just want to remind the board and our audience that we must present assessment data annually. We have a certain time frame in which we must present the DLM data as well as the Access for L data. Although this presentation includes other data points, I remind everyone that we use multiple measures when we are making decisions regarding curriculum and instruction, as well as regarding curriculum and instruction. We felt that it was necessary, as Mrs. Holmgren ended the presentation with Start Strong, to make sure that we are being proactive and transparent with not only our board, but with the community, demonstrating that we are looking at the data. We understand that our students participated in the assessment, and previewing for you what our next steps will be. As Mrs. Holmgren ended the presentation saying that we are required again to present that data out to the board and to the community within 60 days after receiving the summary results from the New Jersey Department of Education. Thank you, Mrs. Holmgren. Thank you, Mrs. Schmid-Sadwin. And any questions?
Ms. Stern?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the information. And I think that it's very helpful for what you presented so far, what you have. So that's great. I'm definitely looking forward to the premiere of the movie. And I actually, one of my questions is, does the board, is it possible for the premiere to be sooner than mid-January, or do you need the several weeks, I guess, from when it's released and available to families to develop the presentation? Because I know we have a meeting on the 21st of December, so maybe that's too short of a timeline, or.
So I can answer, but I will also ask Mrs. Schmid-Sadwin to chime in. We receive those reports on the 6th. They do not come to us in a nice, pretty package. There is additional work that Mrs. Schmidt-Sadwin has to do in order to disaggregate the data so that it is available for us to create all of the charts and graphs and information that is needed to share a comprehensive presentation that is coherent to the community and to the board. And that is not something that is done within a 6-day turnaround. So.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work. So that is really helpful. Thank you for explaining that. I have a couple more questions, but I don't know. This is Mary, if you want others to chime in or.
I think Ms. Friedel and Mr. Avadia also have questions, so why don't, Ms. Friedel, if you want to answer your questions.
Thank you. So I guess my question, and I'm not sure if it's to you as the data analysis or if it's to Dr. Mahan and Dr. Morton. So for students who didn't take the assessment, they were out sick or what have you, how do we capture how they're doing? I'm assuming that you have, like you said, this isn't the only touch point, but could you explain for students who didn't take this assessment, how we're making sure we know where to group them?
So as I mentioned previously, so I do just want to back up and make sure everyone understands that there were makeup assessments available for students who did not take the original administration. I would have to defer to Mrs. Schmidt-Sadwin and Mrs. Holmgren to tell us our actual participation rate, which was approximately 95%. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we use is multiple measures. So students are continuing to take formative and summative assessments in the classroom. They are taking our district benchmark assessments. And we are, some of our schools use platforms such as iReady and iExcel to provide data for teachers to make informed instructional decisions.
Thank you. And my other question is, are we looking, so it's really shocking to see at the PSAT level that the number of students at East and at West are comparable that are taking the PSAT. But when you move to the SAT, it's a considerable drop in the number of students at West who are taking the PSAT. And then of course you have the discrepancy in the test scores, but what was really shocking was to see the difference in, and then to see PSAT that they're so similar, like 97, 98%, and then all of a sudden this huge drop. So I don't know what we're doing looking at that and what information we're gaining from this to see what's causing that drop.
I think there's some definite questions and considerations to go into when you look at the comparison. One is the PSAT is administered during the course of an academic day in October. And it's structured, the district pays for the PSAT for the students to take, for our 10th and 11th graders. There are some seniors that have been able to take it in the past if they need that score in order to meet the testing requirement for graduation. But it's something that we encourage everybody to take regardless of what choices they are making beyond high school, to have that experience and to go through and to do it, especially over the course of the last few years with the change in the college admissions process. The SAT assessment is expensive. It's an expensive endeavor, for children to involve themselves with, and as Ms. Sadwin talked about, when she went through last year for sure, there were a lot of dates that were canceled, and there are a lot of students that just didn't take it. There is a higher percentage of students or a higher number of students, percentage of students coming out of high school West that are going to Camden County College or an RCBC, Rowan College of Burlington County, coming through. There's not a requirement for an SAT, for a school like that. And I remind everybody, Camden County College, Rowan County, RCBC take more of our Cherry Hill graduates, East and West, than any other schools of higher learning. Those two schools take more of our graduates than any other schools of higher learning. So there's a real financial impact, about that as well, of kids not needing to take the test. So why spend the money to take the test and to go through, what that experience is. So I think all of those, I think there's a deeper story that goes into it, about how kids are spending their money. We'd rather see the kids, And I know from some discussions with families, kids taking that money and paying for an additional dual credit class, where they can earn guaranteed 3 college credits as opposed to sitting for the SAT on another time.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. That was very insightful. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ovadi and then Ms. Stratton.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. Yeah, so my question is, it's very, well, first of all, the data is great. It's great to look at data, and it's great that this is being presented. Do we have good instruction for teachers and administrators? I guess one thing that caught my attention is, so this is posted on Genesis about 2 weeks after this is received by the district. And so will there be a uniform approach for engaging parents? Or will that be school by school, teacher by teacher? And I guess secondly, given some of the things with teachers, will there be some kind of primer in terms of looking at this data on the parental level, once it goes into Genesis? I think I'm getting that right, that Genesis involves the parents' guardians. And I'm just wondering if we'll have kind of a standard approach for what these scores might mean, or what supports and interventions may be, or if that will really be much more on the teacher to parent level in a decentralized way.
So the ISR, the individual student score reports that are posted into the Genesis parent portal, this will be the first year that we have seen those score reports. The score reports will be broken down into 3 levels of support, which include strong support may be needed, some support may be needed, and less support may be needed. We are anticipating that, similar to NJSLA results, the Department of Education will provide talking points around what this specifically means for your child. That is what has been included previously. Currently, as Mrs. Holmgren stated in her presentation as one of the examples, classroom teachers have already started to engage in dialogue around what the data is telling them and how they can be poised to respond to parents in regards to what they are doing to move students in their class from each one of those levels and what additional supports they will be able to provide. So for a student who is falling in strong support may be needed, the intervention or supports that will be offered will look different than a student who is in less support may be needed. So those conversations have already started. We do not have a scripted presentation for staff to use with parents, because one of the things that we pride ourselves on as a district is really providing a personalized instructional experience for every child. So during the conferring process, during individual learning time for students, that is what teachers will hone in on. Yeah, go ahead.
I just have to add this because it's just something different with Start Strong assessments that we haven't had. And that is the Start Strong assessments were a shorter test, but the test results were instantaneous. So the teachers they usually have to wait until we get the scores into Genesis. We were able to provide them with access, actually instantaneous access to the data through the Pearson portal. And so I just got excited about that. It's really neat.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Ms. Stratton.
Thank you. I think that was one of my main questions is how are we preparing parents or caregivers rather to understand the data? And I think what I gather is that our teachers are really excited to have instantaneous response or results for students. So according to what Dr. Mahan just shared, there's a possibility that parents could ask for their results even at conference time coming up, or if they have questions, they could ask maybe in that conference time if they wanted to or not.
So the conferring that I was referencing is when a teacher is working directly with the student The results will not be posted into the Genesis parent portal until after conferences, unfortunately, based on the timeline that we are going to receive them. But certainly anytime after after a parent receives the results, they can absolutely reach out to the teacher and ask clarifying questions around what intervention supports or acceleration are being offered to their child in the classroom.
That's awesome. And two other questions that you probably don't have the answer with because everything is like a snowball right about now. But do we know if we're going to use this assessment or Department of Education is going to have this again, or was this just a one-time post-COVID thing?
Yeah,
Not yet. Okay.
yeah,
We're
kind of
not
aware
aware.
of it right now. And just to go back to the slide that Mrs. Holmgren presented, the first bullet says, the Start Strong assessment was developed in response to a disruption in education caused by the pandemic and was designed specifically to inform instruction. So I'm assuming if we have a full school year in-person learning that we will not see Start Strong, but there is no guarantee.
Just wondered if that's an opportunity for advocacy on our part at a state level to push, like, if our districts seem to do well with it. And then my last question is, at any time will we know, I know typically in this presentation, you guys do a great job of showing even where we are in terms of the state with our scores. Will we know that at any point, or is that not data they're sharing with us?
I don't know.
That's the summary data that will be available December 6th, and then we will present that information to you at the board meeting in January.
Awesome, thank you. Great work. Thank you so much.
Okay, were there any other questions, Ms. Stern?
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. Mrs. Holmgren, you mentioned that you're meeting with the schools. I mean, we have 19 schools. I'm just wondering if you have any other supports to do that work with you, because that's a lot of, I mean, on boots on the ground work with you, besides obviously all the behind the scenes administrative.
As with most of us, I've become very technologically savvy. So a lot of the meetings in the past, when I was traveling to all the 19 schools, I'm able to host those meetings remotely. And not only one school is able to log on at a time, but I'm able to conduct meetings with several schools at a time. So it makes things a little bit easier. I do still prefer to have meetings with specific schools so that we can address the data that we're looking at with that specific school. But technology has made it a lot easier.
I do.
And Mrs. Stern, I will tell you that Mrs. Holmgren and Ms. Schmidt-Sadwin provide incredible amount of support at all of the schools. It's a lot of long hours during the course of the day, into the course of an evening, on weekends, as they follow up. Incredibly conscientious and tremendously well respected by their peers and their colleagues. But when you look at the size of our district for 2 people that are doing it, it's an incredible amount of work just in terms of volume as it constantly changes. They are truly the experts when it comes to state assessment. When I get questions as superintendent, my first thing is always to go to Val and see what her perspective is. And she is always very straightforward about what she believes and what she sees. But it's an incredible volume of work that these 2 individuals, that they go through.
Dr. Malash did not hear me talking, but we were saying the same thing. So that's what I was going to say.
Didn't want to jump in, Dr. Mahan. If you, thank you. And I think, we've had a few of these questions from the Friday memo, and I think it's, about this because it's like we all feel this, I'll speak for myself. I feel a sense of like, we know these kids are in the moment, it's real time happening. And this is our top priority is student achievement. So I know that's why I'm so anxious asked about the preview movie, but I did want to ask where the district assessments, how they play into this. I know I've been hearing kids coming home saying, oh, I took a district assessment, the older kids telling me that. So just wondering if it seems like that's happening simultaneously. It's like happened simultaneously to Start Strong, or were they referring to the Start Strong and they just didn't? The district assessment tests that are given periodically throughout the year. So that was one question. And the other question is just, and this probably speaks to Mrs. Stratton asked about, just regarding what do we do with the information, and Mr. Avadia. And I think we're just generally like guessing that this is going to inform how we use some of the ESSER funds. Those are two questions I have. Thank you.
Okay, so for the first question, where does the Start Strong assessment fit into district benchmark assessments? So I'll start off by saying the process for developing a calendar for assessments for 19 schools across multiple grade levels starts at least 6 months prior to the administration of the exam. So we work diligently, myself, other administrators, Dr. Morton, Mrs. Wethington, our colleague teachers, along with, under the guidance of Mrs. Schmidt-Sadwin and Mrs. Holmgren, to make sure that we are not interfering or trying not to interfere with a variety of competing factors when those schedules are developed. So there may have been overlap. However, that is certainly not the intention. I would have to go back and look at all of the benchmark assessments that have been given. Students may or may not have taken a benchmark or have confused the Start Strong with a benchmark assessment. But most of the Start Strong assessment was administered in October, and most of our benchmark assessments are not administered until after that. So they may have been confusing the Start Strong and the district benchmark assessments. And the second question, if you could just repeat it, I apologize. I was trying to write down everything.
That's okay. And thank you. I'm just understanding, once we have the data, I'm just kind of guessing that very likely will inform perhaps how we allocate the ESSER funds. I mean, it says that here, it's determining the use of the ESSER2 funds. And I mean, I don't know if we're even reevaluating as we go along, because again, it's going to be several months. We're almost halfway through the year at that point, I guess, when we kind of start to discuss it as a board. So
yes, so the ESSER2 funds, I just take you back to a few months ago during the summer. We offered a variety of supports for students throughout the summer, including a catalog of courses for acceleration and enrichment. We also offered opportunities for students at the high school level to participate in credit recovery courses. And we also provided tutoring for students across the K-12 spectrum. Some of the credit recovery courses are still continuing to allow students an opportunity to fulfill their credit obligations. And we are using the Start Strong data as well as anecdotal notes, data from our benchmark assessments to make decisions around what our next step should be regarding ESSER2 funds. We participate in a number of consortiums for Camden County curriculum, and then additional consortiums specific to science and math to help to inform our decisions in regards to how we will provide interventions for students. We are noticing that we have to continue to employ interventions that may be a little bit different than what we have done in the past to meet the greatest number of students, and recognizing that we are still navigating some portions of the pandemic and how we are able to provide those services to our students. So the ESSER2 conversation is certainly on the table. An example that I can give to you that is concrete, at our high schools, the principals are asking for ESSER funds to be used to provide tutoring or homework help for students in the early evening hours so that they can continue to do well in their studies and extra support that may be needed. So typically, have we provided support? Yes, but it is embedded during the academic day or right after the school day. This summer was the first time, I believe, that we started to offer support in the late evening hours after students are done with activities and sports and work, where they are able to devote specific time to their studies. I know West has continued to provide some of those services utilizing Title I funds, but now we're looking at this across the entire district. So we are certainly starting those conversations, but now we need to look across the K-12 spectrum and really hone in on particular content areas.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for that thorough presentation. That will now bring us to administrative reports, and I will turn it over to Dr. Malash.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. And thank you, Ms. Sedwin and Mrs. Holmgren. Dr. Morton, are we doing, you're doing update now, or are we doing that during C9? Okay. Mrs. Neary, there are no administrative reports this evening.
Okay, thank you. That'll bring us to correspondence then. Did anyone have any correspondence? Mr. Ovadia?
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. Yeah, I can't figure out the technology, but that being the case. Just a couple things to note. Since last we met, I think we had the max number of board members at the Beck Improvement Project meeting on October 27th. So we had 4 of us out there, and it was a really nice tour of the building, some areas identified. Bob Garrison did the presentation, and we had a nice virtual audience as well as about 12 people in the crowd, but we had our max BOE complement and a nice assortment of administrators supporting the effort. So that was great. And then the second thing I have is this morning, if you recall, Mrs. Neary, we spent about 2 hours with Zone PTA. It was a really engaged group. And for about an hour of that time, we presented to about 27 people about bond, where that's headed as a process, but really what the improvement plans that are going on school by school are about, what the point of view is, what's going on in the deliberations. And I would say we probably got between comments and questions, maybe 25. Really, really active group, really cares about this district. And we had some real, what I felt were interesting and frank conversations, institution to institution. So a really nice morning. And thank you to Zone for inviting the 2 of us to do a little engagement with them. So that was really nice.
Thank you, Mr. Ovadia. Yes, it was a big thank you to the Zone PTA for having us this morning and having that great dialogue, great questions, very open, just wanting to do the best for the district. So it was a very good conversation this morning. Thank you, Mr. Ovadia. Was there any other correspondence from the board members? Okay. If not, that'll bring us to our first public comment. And first public comment is for agenda action items only. That's items 17 through 20. As usual, please state your full name, municipality, and agenda item. Acting as civil models of decorum, Cherry Hill is a community that values education. Issues that affect our children, schools, and community bring out strong emotions in all of us. The Board of Education takes seriously its vision to work with civility. Please join the board in sending a message to our students that even the most difficult issues can be addressed while showing respect for one another. And as usual, we'll start with a member of the audience and then we'll go to a member on the line.
Hi, Jennifer Nadio, 224 North Madison Avenue. I'm not quite sure what number it is, but it is about the Hibbs and bullying.
I believe it's, what is that, item 20.1?
Okay, item 20.1. I've been noticing, not only on social media, but also talking to families, and then I saw the middle school letter that went out yesterday. And I've been watching the Board of Ed meetings and the number of Hibbs that are coming in, and I'm really concerned. And it's not just on the special ed side, it's everywhere. The students are extremely traumatized over what happened with COVID, and they've come back in. And I really would love to see a plan from the district, not from the parents. I think the letter really doesn't work, because when I've been told about my own son, well, it's not across environments. Well, it's not across environments. You're sending a letter home to parents to talk to them about their children, but it's happening in school. What are we doing? What is the plan? How are we decreasing the number of HIBs? How are we decreasing the number of videos on, TikTok, YouTube? I'm not sure about any of that stuff. So I would really like the board and the administration to really focus on a plan for HIB, anti-bullying, and get our students to really, really love coming to school, get some really great activities involved in school so that they want to be there, they want to learn, and go from there. But I just am very, very upset to see the number of HIBs every single meeting, and to see everything that's happening and the letters going home and that kind of thing. So just want to put my 2 cents in there as a mom. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Nadio. Next, we'll go to the line, and we have a number. Please state your full name, municipality, and agenda item.
Hello, is that,
Yes, we-
is that me? Okay, Jeff Potowitz, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It's 17.1. Now therefore be it resolved by the Cherry Hill School Board of Education that the board hereby approves the appended list of approved private providers to perform such evaluations, consultations, and services as are determined necessary and prudent by the Director of Pupil Services. I, in effect, asked previously if the Director of Pupil Services is a member of all IEP teams for every student in the district. I asked the school board to modify this wording. A member of the school board asked the board solicitor, who in effect answered this was administrative. First, child study teams or school district board's decision can be challenged under IDA and state statutes using the state complaint process like the SEPAG, the original SEPAG did, or a due process hearing. Both of these are considered administrative processes. All right. I'm reading from NJ Code 6A14 2.5. Upon completion of an initial evaluation or reevaluation, a parent may request an independent evaluation if there is a disagreement with the initial evaluation or a reevaluation provided by the District Board of Education. A parent shall be entitled to only one independent evaluation at the School Board of Education's expense each time the District Board of Education conducts an initial evaluation or reevaluation with which the parent disagrees. The request shall specify the assessment the parent is seeking. Such an independent evaluation should be provided at no cost to the parent unless the District Board of Education initiates a due process hearing to show that its evaluation is appropriate, and following the hearing, a final determination to that effect is made. Okay. 17.1 contradicts the statutes by saying and assuming what is necessary and prudent for the student is determined unilaterally by one person, the Director of Pupil Services, not an IEP team, and possibly avoiding the need for the district to call for a due process hearing while still not providing an independent evaluation, etc. In other words, the process could be stalled. School board, please modify the language of 17.1.
Thank you, Dr. Potowitz. Okay, next we have Cherry Hill Zone PTA.
Oh, hi, it's Kristen Viglietta. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm calling as myself. I'm not sure how it came up as zone PTA. I just, thanks to each of you for all the work that you guys are doing. I'm calling as myself, but a few members of zone exec did meet with Dr. Morton and Mr. Goldthorpe on October 26th about implementing tutoring at the middle school and high school level. So it was great to hear Dr. Mahan mention that
Ms.
tonight.
Vignetta, which agenda item are you speaking to?
I'm sorry. It was the presentation on the Start Strong. Was it
Oh.
6.1?
It's not actually an action item. Action items are 17
Okay,
through
I'll call
20,
back.
so it would be at the end. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, we have nobody else in the audience on the action items. And I'm seeing nobody else on the line. Okay, so that'll bring us to the end of our first public comment period, and we'll move to the committee of the whole. And up first, we have curriculum and instruction, and that's led by Mrs. Matlack, Dr. Mahan, Dr. Morton, and Caitlin Mallory. So I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Matlack.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mahan and Dr. Morton to give our presentations for this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. So we're going to, Dr. Morton and I have two graduate studies that we're going to present first, and then we will jump right into the school start time survey updates and analysis. The first graduate study research project is titled "The Effects of Social and Emotional Learning Strategies of Modeling and Kindness in a Fourth Grade Inclusion Classroom." The goal of this project is to study the effect of social emotional learning, kindness strategies, and modeling on social and emotional learning for students in a fourth grade inclusion classroom. The objective of this study is to improve students' social and emotional skills using the SEL strategies of kindness and modeling. The lessons will start with kindness instruction that are modeled by the teacher, followed by guided practice, paired with activities, and finish with independent practice displayed by the students. A consent letter will be sent to all parents, and participation in this study is voluntary. The person conducting the research is a teacher at Cooper Elementary School and is obtaining or pursuing a Master's of Arts degree in special education, again, from Rowan University. Any questions?
Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Mahan. For students who opt out of this, there will be alternative activities?
Yes. Okay, Dr. Morton will present the next.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahan. Next, we have a doctoral study from Fairleigh Dickinson University. It's a doctoral candidate out of the school there. And study is an exploration of the impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives on the college advising and admission process within the Cherry Hill Public Schools. Ultimately, the goal is to study if the district's commitment to cultural proficiency, equity, and character education has changed the college post-secondary advising process. In this particular study, students will not be sampled or surveyed in any way. There'll be direct collection methods utilized, interviews that will take place with staff members. In total, there's an estimate of about 36 staff members to participate in the study, and they shall include guidance counselors, administrators, Dr. Malash, and myself as well. Participation is voluntary. It is a resident in town who's conducting this study. It's something that we hope and will yield some good information for us. Questions?
Ms. Stern?
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, this is not the research is, the person conducting the research is not an employee of the district. It is a resident of the township. But the benefit of doing the research in our district is it's going to give us some guide, I guess, some feedback and perhaps generate some guide if we need to make any changes based on the data, that, we can use the information to do that. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And all the information that's gleaned from the interviews will be, the district will remain anonymous throughout the entire process. And it's not going to be published as Cherry Hill School District, but there'll be information that's shared with us. So we are able to use it effectively.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so we'll move on to the school start time investigation, some updates and survey analysis. Go ahead, we can start with the first one. All right, so timeline. So I tell a story always, but I think the first day that I started in my new role here, I was charged with the task of leading the district's investigation of start times, something that was near and dear to Dr. Malash's heart, and something that I think was definitely a necessary thing for us to explore. Prior to COVID, there was a national move to really examine and take a look deeply at high school start times in particular, but our school district, being a pre-K through 12 district, requires that we take a more global look at our start times and handling investigations comprehensively. But anyway, this is the timeline that was administered, or that was applied rather. So starting September 13th through the 17th, we administered a school start time survey. The following groups were included in that. In September as well, the high school administrators did a great job of facilitating student voice group discussions. They held discussions with students, with staff, and with parents as well, to gain additional insight and to gain perspective. We formed a school start time steering committee. It's a diverse committee, representatives from across the district, including parents, teachers, central administration, school administration, building administrators. We have 4 students on that committee. It's definitely a robust committee. Committee held its first meeting on October 22nd. We'll be following up with another meeting on November 12th, and then we have another meeting scheduled for December 10th. So the procedure. So 3 surveys were developed. We surveyed parents and across the district, pre-K through 12, staff members at the secondary level, grades 6 through 12, and students in grades 6 through 12 as well. Again, the surveys were administered during that first full week of school, and we used an online application called SurveyMonkey. The purpose of the survey was to gain an understanding of the perspective of stakeholders regarding current school start times. And the survey was designed to ascertain attitudes regarding school start times. And we used a 5-point Likert scale where responses were weighted from extremely satisfied to unsatisfied. And reporting the data today, what I'll do is anything that was reported as extremely satisfied, moderately satisfied, or satisfied, I'll just say individual responses indicated satisfaction. And moderately unsatisfied or unsatisfied will be reported as dissatisfied or unsatisfied. So as I reviewed the results, some of the comments that I had an opportunity to read asked the question, why did we undertake this? Why did Dr. Malash charge me with this from the outset of my role here? First and foremost, these 2 students that you see here pictured, this is Gina Liu and Aiden Rude, 2 students in district. And these young people really led a charge of a group of kids, Cherry Hill students, for later start times. I'm sure the board has heard these children speak on a number of occasions at board meetings early in the year or in the summer, I recall. And they did a tremendous amount of research, surveyed students throughout the district, and attempted to ascertain or attempted to identify reasons why we should push start times back. Some of the research that these students came across, and this is part of national research, what it speaks to about start times, and moving start times back for adolescent students get more sleep. There's statistics that speak about improved mental health for high school students when the start time's later. There's studies that show that there's increased academic performance. One thing that we had reviewed in our first steering committee meeting that was very interesting is that there's a direct correlation between teen automobile accidents and the amount of sleep that they get. There was a reduction in teen automobile accidents in places where students obtain more sleep due to later start times. And something else that's really interesting, we may have always heard and we may refer to this idea of 8 hours of sleep as being the optimum amount of sleep. But the leading sleep scientists and sleep studies indicate that 8 to 10 hours is the amount of nightly sleep that adolescents should get, with 8 being the floor and 10 being like more of like an optimum amount. So survey results. So the participation was excellent. The building principals did a fantastic job of administering the survey in their buildings. In total, we had 3,915 parents take part across the district. And the breakdowns are underneath. At the pre-K level, 57, elementary level, 935 people, middle school level, 1,100, and at high school, 1,823 participants. Students, nearly 4,000 in grades 6 through 12, 3,945. At the middle school level, 2,046 students took part, and at the high school level, 1,904 between the high schools East and West and the alternative school. And then staff, we had 439 staff at the secondary level, 199 of which were middle school staff members and 234 high school staff members. All right, so we'll start with the parent survey. And pretty much what I did, survey was 13 questions, but I pulled out highlights, and I'm just going to report like the highlights, the things that really stood out from the survey data. So as it relates to sleep, we heard a statistic about sleep. 71% of parents reported that their children appear sleep deprived during the week, at least one day. So that could be anywhere from 1 to 5 days. And 34% of parents reported that their children obtained 8 or more hours of sleep per night. Other than that, everyone else obtains less sleep than that. And here was where the rubber meets the road ultimately. So feelings toward current start time. So parents were asked to indicate their level of satisfaction at specific grade levels about current start times. We'll see the elementary number here. 87% indicated satisfaction. At the middle school level, 77% satisfaction. However, at the high school level, we see that number changes just a bit. And there are a couple graphs that just demonstrate that. I try to look for trend lines, and we try to establish better understanding as we look at this data. So we see as we move across the different levels, we move up to high school, there's less satisfaction with start times. The next slide, the next graph just shows it in inverse manner. It shows the level of dissatisfaction. So as we move across levels, those at the high school level seem to indicate, parents at the high school level rather, seem to indicate less satisfaction with current start times. So we also asked all of the participants in the survey to identify any perceived benefits. There were about 10 items they were able to choose from, and perceived concerns as well. But here were the benefits. Parents felt that moving the time back would allow for more sleep for the high school level students, that it would improve mental health and emotional health and improve student academic scores. Next slide. Concerns. The most frequently selected choice here was that parents said they really didn't have any concerns with undertaking this process or exploring this. But then those that followed, that were also selected, there's concerns about impacts on athletic scheduling and opportunities, impact on elementary students of having to either go to school earlier or go home later, depending upon what's recommended, and then impact on family routines. It's taking its time, no problem. All right, so we should be at students. There we go. All right, students. All right, students. So the students that took the survey, some interesting highlights. 90% of the students surveyed indicated that they need to be woken up by an alarm clock or by someone else. Makes me feel good about my own teenage children. 19% of the students indicate that they obtain 8 or more hours of sleep. So 81% of those surveyed would obtain less than that minimum amount that sleep studies have indicated that they need. 84% of the students reported that they feel sleep deprived during school at least 1 day per week. As we further investigate that number, 50% report feeling sleep deprived at least 3 days. So most of the week is what I put here. And 31% reported feeling sleep deprived every day that they're in school. But then we go to where the rubber meets the road, feelings about current start time. So again, we didn't survey elementary students, so middle school students, 69% are currently satisfied with the start time. We see at the high school level, that changes just a bit. We have a 41% satisfaction rate. However, the majority are not satisfied with current start times. And the breakdown is similar to what we saw with the feedback obtained from our parents. That's the level of satisfaction. This one, the orange is, you can go to the orange. Yeah, that's dissatisfaction. Students, again, trend line points upward for that. Perceived benefits. Interestingly, very similar to what parents said. Kids said almost the same exact thing. They believe that later start times will improve mental and emotional health. Later start times will allow for more sleep for high school students. They also indicated here improved academic success. Concerns, similar to their parents, the most frequently selected item was that students didn't really have concerns, but following that, concerns about impact on elementary and middle school students having to go home later, athletic scheduling and other opportunities, and students also spoke about job opportunities and things that they have to do after school. All right, staff. Staff were not asked to provide any feedback or information about sleep, the amount of sleep they obtain and feelings of sleep deprivation, but they were asked to provide their feelings about the current start times. Staff at the elementary level, 88% satisfied with the start time there. At the middle school level, 82% satisfied there. However, again, we see at the high school level, that flips just a bit. 54% are unsatisfied with high school start times. And again, same trend line. You can go to the next one. Same thing. Staff, perceived benefits. They believe later start times will improve student mental health, mental and emotional health, allow for more sleep, improve high school student attendance, reduce high school tardiness, and improve student mental and emotional health. Perceived concerns, again, the most frequently selected, they have no concerns, but concerns still about athletic scheduling and opportunities, impact on childcare arrangements for younger siblings, impact on family routines, and impact on high school student after-school job opportunities. So we went through this data with the steering committee, and at the end, I asked a question, and the question essentially was, do we need to move forward and continue to explore this and investigate it further? And this information here is what was pointed out. So 2,251 parents reported dissatisfaction with high school start times. 2,230 students reported dissatisfaction with high school start times. 232 staff reported dissatisfaction with high school start times. So when we look at what the research says, we look at what our stakeholders at the high school level specifically had to say, we believe that it's our responsibility to continue to explore options that may exist. We do realize that this is not easy here at any means. I think that the data is pretty compelling about the elementary and middle school levels, and also at the high school level. So there's a lot of balancing to do here and a lot of conversations to have. We have our next meeting on this Friday, November 12th, as mentioned earlier. And I'm eagerly anticipating that meeting and looking forward to that meeting to see what the group is able to come up with. That group has done a great job so far. So, questions? Sure.
Just more of the, well, thank you for all of that work. I'm really excited to keep seeing all the feedback and all the feedback from the community and our schools and students. What interested me was elementary and middle school times. I thought that was, that's kind of surprising, but then what our students were saying when they presented the need to keep looking into this is actually, it seems like a lot of people feel that same way. So I'm glad that we can continue looking. I just really impressed with all this work. So thank you.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate it. As we've again gone through the results, those who are experiencing the 7:30 start time are the ones who actually have a more thorough understanding and stronger feelings about the times in general. I think the other levels, I think it's pretty clear they're happy with what's occurring.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Morton.
Sure.
Okay, that'll then bring us to business and facilities, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Schultz and Mrs. Sugars.
I will turn it over to Ms. Sugars to talk about our maintenance plan and our food service challenges.
So on the agenda tonight, you will see two forms that need to be approved by the board. These are standard forms that we approve every year. They're part of our QSAC process. One of the forms is called the M1, and the second one is called the CMP, or the Comprehensive Maintenance Plan. These forms came about many years ago when budgets were slashed and districts were not investing in their facilities and their infrastructures. And so these are just benchmarks to make sure that districts are making minimum requirements into their facilities. And so we will approve these items tonight, and then we will submit them to the county office. We do this every year, how we have to fill out these two forms. And it's just a tracking of what we spend. It's purely budget accounting code driven by the maintenance sequence portion of the budget. Does not include things that we do out of Fund 30 or our larger projects. It is strictly maintenance spending in our budget. Are there any questions about those two forms? Ms. Stern?
Just a quick question. I didn't see any specific exterior of the building, for instance, playgrounds, all that. And I know actually that specifically came up regarding at Kingston when I was at the facilities meeting, was just, that was the main concern for the families there, were the exterior of the playground and so I'm just wondering where that fits into this. I understand this is just kind of procedural almost, but is there like a maintenance plan for exterior?
Well, the items that we include in the comprehensive maintenance plan are state driven, and the state, when you look at the long range facilities plan, divides their maintenance plans by systems. So we try to follow along with that same guideline. I don't know that there is anything specifically for playgrounds within those systems. It's really more looking at HVAC. It might be included in something like site work, but I don't know that there is anything specifically within these documents that addresses playgrounds.
Okay, thanks. So just do we have like a separate, obviously not, this is a mandated, document, but is there like a separate one, or that's just part of our general kind of the capital funds, I guess, is more where we do that type of the exterior? No.
No, most of what's going to happen at the playgrounds is going to come out of our grounds budget, because typically we each year we'll dig out the mulch, we'll replace the mulch, we'll check the swings, or whatever, check out the equipment each year. We occasionally have inspections that are done by our insurance company on the playground equipment. That's going to come out of the grounds budget, not the maintenance budget. And then also, I provided the board an update on the food service program. I had met with Ted Bridges, who is our current food service director. We know that the year started out with many challenges, and I wanted to kind of provide the board with an update as to where we are. One of the biggest challenges that Aramark has been staffing. There are currently 39 Aramark staff members, and they really need about 82. So they are doing the best they can with the limited staff that they have. Unfortunately, they have lost additional staff members since the beginning of the school year. Some moved on to other opportunities, and some were not interested in complying with the COVID testing requirements. So a lot of our elementary schools currently only have one person working in them, and they're serving both breakfast and lunch. Good news is that Aramark did just recently increase their hourly salary. Their starting salary was $12 an hour, and they just increased that to $14 an hour. And so they're hoping that will attract some additional employees. We have been assisting them with posting notices on social media and with our newsletters to try to encourage people to apply for those jobs. They're great jobs if you have children in district. You can be home, leave after they leave, get home before they get home. So we've been posting those and hoping that we get some additional applications. They had done job fairs over the summer, and they were not very well attended. And so we're trying some different avenues in order to do that. The second challenge that they are experiencing is supply chain limitations, which we've all heard about. Ted tells me that typically about 30% of the orders that he puts in do not show up. He's not always made aware that they're not coming, and that creates last minute menu changes that have to be done. The other thing that has become very important is how we package the food. We have been trying to package the food as prepackaged items so that students can grab and go, so they're not lingering in the lines. And we're finding that we may use clamshells one day and paper bags the next day and plastic bags the day after that, because we don't have any consistency in that item. We're also having some issues with refrigeration and freezers. As you are serving more meals, you need to have more food items on hand. And ideally, if we could find some very large kind of C-box type storage units, we actually have one at East right now, and we could maintain them throughout the district. That would assist us with providing food products throughout the district to the elementary schools. They don't have a lot of refrigeration specifically at the elementary schools. We were in the process of replacing some. We had some orders canceled. We're looking at alternatives in terms of replacing those orders that were canceled because they weren't coming till February. So that's been another challenge. As we have been offering the free meals, we've seen a significant increase in the number of meals that are offered on an average daily basis. In October of 2019, we served on an average daily basis 442 breakfasts. We're currently serving 1,468 breakfasts, and we would serve about just over 3,000 lunches, and we are currently serving just about 5,500 lunches. So we've seen a significant increase with supply chain issues, refrigeration issues, and staffing issues, all impacting how we serve those additional meals. We have been trying to expand our offerings. We started out with cold meals in September as we were sort of
getting used to serving meals in the buildings again and making sure specifically at the elementary school level that children could do the grab and go and be able to, open their own milks and do those kinds of things. So we started out with cold meals in September. In October, we tried a mix of hot and cold. And for November, we're trying to do a hot item each day. We've also been trying to offer what we do at the secondary level, a little bit different there at the middle schools and the high schools. Just trying to kind of meet the expectations, but not overwhelm the staffing that we have on hand. But we did have some good news. Ted recently attended a culinary club meeting at the Crucy Middle School and had some ideas about contests, about coming up with a soup recipe that they could incorporate into the school menu. So he was excited about getting to do something fun besides his daily worries of trying to get to coordinate all these items together. So I will keep the board updated on, as we go moving forward. As I said, we are hoping that some of this will ease up in the coming months if we can hire some additional staff and alleviate some of the supply chain issues. Then we're hoping that we can continue to expand what we're offering on a daily basis through the program. Are there any questions about food service?
Ms. Stern?
A very quick question. Someone mentioned to me they were interested in a position, so I went on the district website to see if I could just send them the link to apply or to find out about the positions. I could not find it. I'm not sure. Is Aramark able to post on the district website like the positions? Because obviously it's not our job offering, but maybe just to help with that.
We could certainly do that. I have not been asked to do that by Aramark. So I did put out in the weekly newsletter this past Friday. The link was in there. It went out on social media today as well, which Ted had asked me to do. So we could certainly put it on there.
I wasn't sure, procedurally, or if I was just not looking in the right place, but I was actually looking yesterday. So, and I looked on social media and I couldn't, but sometimes I have trouble scrolling through. So I wasn't sure. Thank
it's
you.
there, and we'll continue to push it out too. So
Thank you.
Ms. Tong, did you have a question? Oh, your microphone, we can't hear you.
Can I ask a question about the CMP? Comprehensive maintenance plan? Oh, okay. I was looking at the numbers and the repairs they all look almost the same. The price goes up or goes down. Can you tell me how do you, a number, do you go by square footage, and how is there anywhere we can look more in detail? How are the money is being used or being the numbers? Just for example, I'm just looking at it. Russell Knight. For example, they all similar every year to year. The price of it goes up from 54,943 2021 to 2022, 59,753. 2022 to 2023 is 62,717. Is there any way we can break it down? Like how is this calculated?
The funds are allocated based on square footage of the schools because a lot of our maintenance expenses are not broken down specifically by school. It would be very cumbersome to try to allocate every time we fixed something or repaired something or bought something to break it down by each school.
Okay.
So we allocate the maintenance costs. A lot of those maintenance costs are also salaries. So we allocate them based on square footage of the buildings, and it fluctuates each year depending upon, whatever it is that's going on that year that needed to be addressed. So, so that's how it is broken down. That's why you see the fluctuation.
Okay. If something that's not out of the ordinary, is there any way we can also let us know what the item and how much it costs maybe in the future? I think like Cherry East, I think we have something called we built the drainage system behind the debug gym. Like how much we would use that to, to repair that session or something, because most of the, like you say, is general, but then there's others not in general. Is there any way we can break it down? Let us know so how much we use to repair that particular section.
Well, it's difficult to do because again, this is just based on maintenance and the maintenance sequence within the budget. There's also other items that are done through Fund 30, for example, or through Fund 10. If it's a smaller project, this does not include specific projects that we do. This is really day-to-day maintenance.
Okay.
So if we did, a particular project, that would not be included in this, that would be separate.
Okay, thank you for that.
Ms. Stratton?
Yes, I just had a question in terms of the testing requirement that might be a turnoff, and I'm experiencing that as well. I think all organizations are, but is their requirement for Aramark different than what we have as a district, or is it just complying with our district requirement?
It is the same requirement as the district.
Okay, and then my other question, Ms. Sugar, is I know in the past, there used to be a lot of our own district staff that would, I guess, work dual organization, work for Aramark and then work for us as well. Is that still able to be done if there is any of our own staff or no?
I believe that we can still do that. I don't know that we have a level of interest in doing that at this point. Are there any other questions? Okay. Is there anything else, Mrs. Sugars? No, Mrs. Neary, that's all. Okay, great. Thank you. That'll bring us to human resources then, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Schultz.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. The HR committee did meet prior to the start of our meeting today at 5:30. At this time, the matters that were discussed cannot be reported out. So I will pass it back to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. That'll bring us to policy and legislation, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Wethington. And in Ms. Friedel's absence, Mr. Avadia.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. So, Mrs. Wellington, would you like to start us off?
Mr. Vadia, are you going to start with care of school property?
Yes, okay. That's an excellent idea. So we I guess I asked at the last meeting that we look at this care of school property. And so, here's what I would say. There are two policies to think about that are related. One of them is care of school property. The other one is the policy we looked at last time, which is
It's 8550, unpaid
8550.
meal charges, outstanding food service charges.
Yes. And so here's how I believe they're related. And I wanted to get a sense of what the board thinks. So 8550, which we looked at last time, says failure to address arrears will result in the matter, which is owing money on school lunch or meals. That reverts to 5513 care of school property. In 5513 care of school property, it says once you get to $75 in arrears for meal payments until payment is received in full, there are privileges that may be withheld. And so in high school, that includes extracurricular activities, purchasing tickets for school dances, including proms, attending class trips, including the senior trip, purchasing a yearbook. In middle school, it's participating in extracurricular activities, purchasing tickets for school dances, attending class trips, and purchasing a yearbook. In elementary school, it's participating in after-school events, activities, and attending class trips. Now, These are not automatically taken away. It's no one's desire to take away such privileges. However, as this thing reads now, we do lump in people who have outstanding food service bill charges with people who are essentially taking or defacing school property. And discussion we had at some point teed up at P&L is, are those things fundamentally different? And if they are, should we, in kind of the current spirit of 8550, look at disassociating the two policies and essentially removing that ability to do those kind of sanctions at a $75 meal charge? And so I feel like I personally have been inarticulate about this, but putting that out there, does anyone on the board have an opinion on that matter?
Mr. Abadi, I would be in agreement of disassociating the two policies and removing the repercussions at that charge. I don't know how any of the other, Ms. Stern?
I'm in agreement with Mr. Avadia and Mrs. Neary. I don't think it belongs in that, the meal charges. I don't think care of school property belongs in the meal charges policy.
Mr. Arroyo?
Same. I'm in agreement.
Are there any other board members?
Mrs. Stratton?
So we would just be no longer considering an unpaid balance as part of that policy and separating that out, just so I'm understanding.
You know what, Mrs. Wellington may have the best answer for that. I mean,
I don't think that that goes back to administration, right? Like that was my question that Corinne asked. If we are saying we're disassociating it, I would be curious from the board members, I guess, that want to disassociate it, that what is that? What are your thoughts on what happens to Corinne's point? If somebody has a meal charge and we disassociate it, then what? As a board member who was on the board at the time that we discussed this in length.
Yeah, I think that's why I asked Ms. Schultz of just like, what will we put in place? Because I don't want us to be in a limbo with nothing. Although we're in the blessing of post-COVID where everyone's eating free, I don't want us to be caught needing a policy really quickly. So I guess I just wanted to get understanding on what will be, because we have a good procedure in place, but what will be the policy move forward so that we don't 2 or 3 years from now be having the same conversation we had in 2019.
So I think for me, and my understanding too as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Green, but at the state level, they had legislated to remove the punitive measure. So by leaving that in there, we still have a punitive measure in place.
Well, there is a distinction between the punitive measure itself at the state level and an ability to collect, and they've left it kind of ambiguous in terms of that, and in terms of how does one deal with collection or prevent an excessive amount of failure to comply with the policy is what it amounts to. So it's not necessarily prohibited in that sense, the way they've drafted it. So it's a complicated topic in terms of it.
So
having said that, we can certainly look at that further in terms of, what, this is a thorny problem for every school district, essentially, in terms of the need to basically ensure fiscal integrity of the program, balanced with the needs of the students and the families. So, I mean, we can take a further look, but, you can pull that out, but then the question is, how do you basically ensure the financial integrity of the program? And that's something we can certainly look into further.
I think that would be helpful, at least to understand the implications, and then how are school districts handling that challenge elsewhere, right? Because the punitive measure, the challenge is against a student who doesn't have the ability to pay the debt.
And there are ways to balance that. What you want to do is you want to avoid a situation where someone is taking advantage of that situation. Essentially, that's the difficult balance. Obviously, no one is looking to be punitive for someone who is unable to afford it, and we have mechanisms to deal with that. But there are other individuals who sometimes just refuse to comply, despite having the obvious ability to do so. So that's where the crux comes in, and that's something we can take a look at.
Thank you, Ms. Stern.
I mean, I think about a much bigger picture with this. I think about, children's being held responsible for financial obligations, and in the eyes of the law, what they're able to be held responsible and held not responsible for. I think about other things like, children paying, for instance, student activity fees, or parents paying them or not paying them, and then kids still participating. I mean, there's so many ways in which a lot of stuff like small dollars go on, and they're small dollars in the big picture. So for me, the emotional weight of this, the fiscal responsibility putting on children, I think that far, in my eyes, that far outweighs the concern about, a few people perhaps, which we don't even know. We don't know the circumstances. We've never found out the circumstances. My understanding of, aggregate, what are the circumstances of these families? Who are these families? So it's just, it's a small amount of money in a huge budget that we have. And so.
Thank you. Ms. Stratton, did you have another question?
Well, I just want to reiterate, because I appreciate what Ms. Stern just said, but I just want to reiterate that there is a very robust set of things that needs to happen prior to this policy taking effect where someone is held liable for it. And I don't necessarily see it as us being punitive to the student or putting the fiscal responsibility on the student. And the only reason I'm saying that is because of the robust steps we put in place that will happen at the administrative level, at the school level, that actually increase the ability for the relationship to be built for that caregiver to explain what's happening and us to provide resources, if that is in fact the issue. But I think what the policy simply does is allows us to be fiscally responsible. So, I get that would people be more comfortable if we said the policy of what your arrears are needs to be equal to whatever you're comparable to what you're trying to attend, I guess? Because I could see someone with, like, I'm assuming again, but if and I'll use myself, I forget lunches all the time, or did forget lunch all the time, but I'm certainly not going to pay for Disney World if I have a $500 lunch bill anyway, right? So so that's never going to be taken away from me because it's going to be one or the other. And I would hope that someone would pull me on my coattails when I'm going to play for Disney and be like, hey, can you clear this? But again, that's about the relationship building piece. And I just want us to, put out there publicly, reiterate that we really took that into consideration when we laid out all of those steps. And it was very careful with the wording of saying these things may happen, not should or definitely will, but they may happen because we wanted to give that discretion to our administrators at the building level. So I just want to make sure that's out there because things will get misconstrued very quickly.
Thank you, Ms. Stratton.
I was going to jump in and say that too, Corinne. I don't have the exact wording, but I remember that it was step one, building principal contacted, made 3 attempts. The superintendent made an attempt. There were multiple steps before it reverted to the policy that we're talking about. So there were 3 or 4 steps that were in the meal policy before it reverted to care of school property. And then to your point, I would like to reiterate, it said may happen. And Dr. Blash, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was also in the discretion of, some of the things that I think Ms. Stern had said, student activity fees. I just want to be clear that those are also things that there's discretion if there are students in the district who are unable to provide for those. There is a process in place to take care of that as well. So I just wanted to also kind of state that, because to Corinne's point, before information gets out there and is swirling, like that's also, there's processes in place for families who need the support of the district as well. But this is more about being financially responsible. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yes, in terms of student activity fees or field trips or other trips, there are things that are in place. You know, if children have been on the free and reduced lunch list, then their student activity fee is waived. The secondary school principals also have the ability to waive the fee, any child or family, depending upon circumstances that they deem as appropriate. You know, the parent-child just needs to speak with the principal about what's taking place. So yes, there are processes and practices in each of our schools that are followed.
Thank you.
So I think for me, just to note, just two things, and I don't know really where to go with this, but the policy we just revised says we're not going to publicly identify or stigmatize a student who cannot pay for a meal or whose school meal bill is in arrears. Now, you know, to me, we're in some sense, we're both identifying and stigmatizing them if they can't. And I know it's not the intention of anyone, but now they're not going to prom. The reason is this. And I think the second thing, oh gosh, well, yeah, no, so that's one important thing. I think the only second thing is, you know, for students in our care, the expectation is that their families are paying for them. But that decision is still the families, and yet the punishment, you know, if it ever does get enforced, is on the student. And I think that's what, between the identify and stigmatize and the separation of the actor and the person who bears the brunt of the consequence, these are the two things for me that I think the easiest thing is to disassociate them. But I've really said what I have to say. I don't know if we want to do a straw poll. I don't know if this merits a lot more examination. I really defer, I guess, to our president. I don't know.
Well, I think for me, it would be helpful to get the information from Mr. Green as far as how other districts have handled this since the change in legislation, I believe last spring. What they've done, given the intent of what that legislation is, and then ensuring we're compliant.
Sure, I would be happy to do that, you know, in terms of that. I mean, the legislation does not prevent taking steps to deal with arrearages. It just basically prevents districts from refusing to provide lunches to students. It actually took out the provision of the statute that actually used to require that. But we can certainly provide a report to the board in terms of that area.
Thank you. That would be helpful, at least for me.
Okay, next up, last time we discussed policy bylaw 0155.1, board member participation at board meetings using electronic devices. We wanted to get more perspective as a board from Mr. Green. And we knew that there were some concerns raised, but it was, you were unable to be here at that meeting. So we wanted, I think, to hear from you, and then maybe just to go around to see if there are comments based on your comments.
Well, in the first place, I have a little bit of a disagreement to some extent with the School Boards Association, which has for many, many years recommended that if a district is going to permit remote board member participation, that it have a policy particularly authorizing that. I've never felt that that was, you know, necessary under the Open Public Meetings Act, which by its very terms grants the authority to have remote participation, even though at the time it was written, what they were thinking about was telephones. But the policy that the draft policy that I saw that you have seems like it's to some extent a little bit all over the place, because it seems to be a case-by-case determination per meeting, per board member. I think that just in a way, to me, that's not much better than, you know, not having any policy, because it's going to vary depending upon the circumstances of the board member and the meeting and whether it should be granted or shouldn't be granted. So it seems like it could be some kind of a bit of a chaotic application in terms of that. By the same token, it's not a bad idea that if the board is going to permit remote participation, and that's the first fundamental question is, does the board wish to do that? Or does it want to basically say, we're going to require everybody to be here, and if you can't be here, so be it. And that's a decision that a lot of boards struggle with. Now, of course, obviously right now we're in a little different situation coming out of the pandemic, but this has been an issue for many boards for many years, and some boards will not permit it at all. Other boards will, for example, if a board member goes away for the summer, have permitted them to participate remotely, or if they're on business trips, those types of things. So there's a lot of nuances to it. In terms of the first question is it something the board even wants to consider? And that's really a policy decision for the board in terms of the wisdom of permitting that. It's difficult. It's not something that certainly from my perspective you want to have on a regular basis. It should be the exception rather than the rule, because remote participation has its limitations. It's a little easier now and more effective now than it used to be, since with video and audio, you have a better sense of what's going on, but it's still not the same as being in the room. By the same token, it does provide flexibility if you have members who are traveling to participate in the process. So, to me, there's not a reason not to do it, in the sense that this has actually been contemplated all along by the Open Public Meetings Act. The question is, how does the board think, if it wants to go this route, which is the first question, do you want to implement it? And do you basically maybe want to put some more parameters on this policy the way it's been presented? And that I think is kind of a robust discussion that needs to take place, assuming that the board is even interested in going down that road. So that's the first question is it something you want to entertain? I mean, we have certainly done it in the past. In the past, obviously, we did it while the pandemic required it. The question is, how do you want to present that going forward? Or do you want to do it on an ad hoc basis and just let board members participate, when they're just unable to be here, which is another option to basically do it and just be much more flexible instead of having to make an advance application and then make a determination of whether or not to grant that application, which causes me some concern in terms of how that gets interpreted.
I was going to ask that because when does participation include voting?
Right.
Because then it does. Okay, because that was I think some of the question in the last meeting was, then if it didn't, why would you bother? But then beyond that would be the policing of that for who becomes, overseeing when you allow, when you don't. That was where I had concern. Does that then become board leadership?
Yeah, that's the
what does that
concern I
look
had.
like?
That's the concern I had looking at it too, which is, do you really want to get into the policing of that entire area? As opposed to simply saying, the other point is you don't want abuse of the process either, because you don't want somebody never showing up to a meeting. So there has to be some valid basis for it. You can't, and that's why the policy does try to distinguish at least that it's for illness, quarantine, or a business trip that prevents you from being here, essentially. So I appreciate why the policy as drafted, presents it that way to at least put some limitations on it. Mrs. Neary, you've raised the exact question, which is how do you police that? And who wants to get into the policing of that? And then what happens if a board member is the president going to make that determination? And if so, then the board member theoretically has the right to appeal to the full board. And what's the process for that? And how would that occur? And how would you actually accomplish that before the board meeting? Because you can only do it at a board meeting. So
this feels like a very slippery slope, and I get consternation over just listening to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how anybody else feels, but hearing what that looks like in application is what concerns me.
I feel like, just like on an as needed basis, I'm not sure if I feel like we actually need a policy. Because in the instances that we are traveling or anything, it's like business trips. Well, I just feel like we'd have enough notice to let somebody know we'll need virtual access to that. And, I don't know if we actually need a policy. I don't foresee it happening too often, to be honest with you.
I tend to agree with you, Mr. Williams.
Just to clarify, we could, on an as needed basis, grant or allow a board member to participate remotely. And we don't need a policy for that.
My opinion is you don't. As I said, school boards has for many, many years, this probably goes back more than 20 years, suggested that you have a policy. There have been, the court decisions are a little, they're not uniform in this area. There have been a few court decisions over the years. Certainly the trend is, as it's appeared to me, especially with the legislation that actually specifically authorized it during the health emergency, has been to permit it. And I don't think it's necessary that a district have a policy. The reason school boards recommends that is that in case you get a challenge, at least you have a policy you can point to if you're in court to say, this is our policy, this is what we do, as opposed to an ad hoc, means of doing it. If we have a policy, I think I would probably make it a little more streamlined than what's been presented.
Well, couldn't our policy just be as
Needed.
as needed?
You
That's it, and that just.
Exactly, to authorize, remote participation, when the board member is unable to be present, essentially. The question is, when do you invoke that and how do you invoke that? Becomes the thorny issue in terms of that, which is one of the reasons I've generally suggested not having a policy. Because Mrs. Arroyo, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, it's basically on an as-needed basis, and it's done when the member has essentially a compelling reason not to be able to be present, which this policy identifies, as illness or quarantine or a business trip. The question becomes, if somebody's, late or tied up in traffic, are you going to permit them to come in by telephone? Those kinds of circumstances.
Right. Ms. Stratton?
Yeah, my question is, do we, as the policy is right, or what's listed right here right now, we need to vote on first and second reading of that, or where would?
No.
No, so
This
if
is
we
just-
have time to add to it or clean it up or
Yeah,
change some of it?
this is just a conceptual discussion.
Okay.
Should we have a policy in the first place?
I guess my thoughts is that, first, I'm a proponent of, if you're ill, can you just be better and not be worried about what's happening on the board? Because
Right.
just stay home and get well.
Excellent
And I
point.
think we should as employers, be encouraging our staff teams to focus on self-care and stop trying to do all the things all the time. But I do understand that there's some things we have to vote that are imperative and need all of us. But I feel like that's exactly why we have the number of us in place as well, too. So, I just want us to be cognizant of giving ourselves leeway and grace. But to Ms. Arroyo's point, I do see that it makes sense to have something that's as needed. But who's going to take that challenge on is the biggest question. And how can Lori get a vote from all of us as this policy reads right now, if it's something that happens, on the fly? It's like herding cats for her now to get us all together to answer something. So how is she going to do that pre-meeting really fast? It's going to be difficult.
I don't necessarily think we need a policy. I just, if it's something that comes up and you're, I honestly don't think, if I'm gonna go on vacation, I'm sorry, but I want to go on vacation. So I really don't want to engage in anything else outside of my family and my vacation. I did experience missing a board meeting this year because of vacation. And I just came back and I caught up to speed and called it a day. I mean, if anyone really felt compelled to come to a meeting, the opportunity is there for them. If they are on a business trip or vacation or something, I agree about the sick thing. I just don't think we actually need a policy around it, to be honest with you. I've had this conversation in other areas. Like people have called in for conference calls and everything. I don't think we need a policy for it.
I also, Ms. Arroyo, to add to that, I think, or to the slippery slope of it all, we also get into, what we probably all experience in our workplace, where you might log in because you can work through the pain. But then when it comes to me, if I have an issue, am I now expected to do as you did because you set the standard and set the tone? Because I'm not gonna. I'm gonna be home. So I think that's another slippery part of this that we have to, as leaders, I don't want to set the precedent of like, oh, no, work through that, and everybody's not built the same.
I think that's why I would lean towards why I think a policy makes sense, so that it's not like an as needed is almost like, to me, what it like, it's more vague to say like, is it for business meetings? You know, I'm not gonna log into a board meeting if I'm on vacation. I'm not gonna log in if I'm sick. Like, I think, like, what are we trying to accomplish with the remote login? That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. Like, is the expectation to log in when you're on vacation, the expectation for board members to log in when it's sick? Like, I don't know that most people would do that. Like, or is it truly when you're traveling for business, you're away from, you're away and you want to be able to log in and to participate. So I almost think it's like, what are we trying to accomplish with the remote board meetings? Because is it really just for people who are traveling for business? If that's the case, then maybe detail what we're trying to accomplish. If it's not, then I'm not sure that should we even allow remote, because
Agreed.
so maybe you kind of take it back a step and say, what are we trying to accomplish with the remote?
Exactly.
Yeah, what
logins?
problem are you solving for?
Right.
Versus we're solutioning the problem.
Correct. Yeah, we're almost solutioning and we don't know what we're trying to solve for, because I think we're all in agreement that if we're sick or if we're on vacation, we're not remote logging in regardless.
Agree. Ms. Stern and then Mr. Avadia.
So I think that I actually can remember sitting in as a community member in an audience in the committee meeting where this was discussed, or maybe I guess it was P&L meeting, because there was previously a board member whose work took them away for the summer, and they worked out of the area in this all summer. And that board member wanted to log in to meetings and couldn't. So I actually don't think it's just theoretical. I think there's some reality to this. I'm a big fan of sometimes a practice rather than a policy. So an agreed upon practice, and that might be changed from board to board with new board members in January. You know, that might be that the entire board agrees, okay, if you're going to, if you choose that for whatever, if you cannot be present, but you choose to attend anyway, which, you know, some of us might want to do if there's a very important topic on the agenda that we want to participate with, and perhaps we're just not in the area, but we're not, you know, we still want to be part of it. I think we could have a process of, you know, emailing the board president, and maybe the board president then, just to ensure that this is being equally applied, that the board president notifies the other members. Whatever the practice is, as long as it's consistent, I think that's the important thing. And it's applied evenly, because that's usually where you can get into trouble if you don't. So that's my input. I don't think I think there have been reasons to discuss this and to have us available, but I think Mr. Green's, you know, advice about not necessarily having a definitive policy that has to be then reviewed every year, I'm in favor of that. That's fine.
It seems like we do have a plurality of the board that says, do this in practice, do this by necessity, and don't pursue a 10-page policy, which this probably is. And with that, I will turn it over to Mrs. Webington. Is that okay?
Sure, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Right.
So if the board has wrapped up that conversation, I'm going to move along to first reading of policies and ask if there's any questions. We had a lengthy list.
Do we need to go down each one, Mrs. Wethington, that's on the first reading?
Certainly. The first was sexual harassment of students. That was a revision to align with some Title IX changes, some pretty significant changes to what we would do in district. Comprehensive health and physicalation adds new statutory requirements. Surrogate parents and resource families is a name revision from foster parents. Eligibility of resident and non-resident students is a change allowing students to stay in the district if it's more than 1 year and the state would assume fiscal responsibility. Education of homeless students, eye protection, emergency and crisis situations, which is fire and fire drills. And those were all first readings.
Okay, did anyone have any questions on those? Those were changes passed down from Strauss Esme, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Okay, it looks like there's no questions on the first reading.
Okay, then we'll move on to second reading. We have emergency or remote instruction, which we discussed in October. The changes to open enrollment, which we discussed in October, and high school graduation, which we discussed in October.
Are there any questions on the second reading? Ms. Stern?
Can I just clarify the open enrollment? The word, this, and specifically at Rosa, is where the policy is proposed to be changed as of July 1. So therefore, open enrollment the process will continue to happen in 2022. Is that our time? I thought our timeline was shorter.
So yes, the change in the policy would go into effect if it is adopted tonight after the second reading. It would go into effect. There's language in there that sunsets the selection process for rising fifth graders to attend Rosa in the fall of 2022. It makes that selection process, which begins in February, Ms. Bevington?
Yeah, January, February.
January, February. It'll make the 2022 administration of that process the last one. It would extinguish after that. But the policy changes would go into effect now.
Okay, were there any other questions? Okay, I guess we can go to the abolishment of policy, Ms. Remington.
Yes, so this policy was abolished. It was children displaced by domestic violence because that language has been incorporated into 5111, eligibility of resident and non-resident students. So it's no longer necessary.
Okay, thank you. Were there any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward. Okay, it doesn't look like there are any. I believe that brings us to the end for P&L. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so that brings us to strategic planning, and I will turn that back to Mr. Avadia and Mrs. Sugars.
Yes, all right. This time I feel more prepared.
Apologies, Mr. Avadia.
So, yeah, so Lynn has included for us, Mrs. Sugars has, that is, a lovely letter that she wrote on October 25th to the ad hoc committee. And I thank her for closing that loop and allowing them to be part of what we have currently, which is a very robust process in getting feedback. Of course, the ad hoc committee recommendations, as a reminder, populated the last 15 months of our work on strategic planning, that and other feedback that we received. So in the interest of time, I would tell you that one of the things for consideration in your strategic planning backup is the calendar of events for board meetings as relates to strategic planning in January of this coming year. So the next board would be seated. But as far as I could see, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mrs. Sugars, but the question is, do we do the Garrison presentation on January 11th that would essentially show the projects for approval to submit to the state for referendum? Do we do that? Or do we have a special board meeting added to the traditional calendar on January 18th and have Garrison do that same basic idea of a presentation at that time? Either way, we are slated to approve projects on the January 25th meeting. So it's an issue of timing. Now, I will just, as a comment before I open for questions, just say that one of the feedback items that I've heard on the rollout of these school buildings is, why are you waiting for September of 22? Like, we need this now. Like, why are you messing around with this? And I think it's just important, if we look at the sort of the Garrison deck, September 27th, 2022, that's the soonest we could possibly do this. This is not us wasting time. This is us having to submit stuff to the state, get it back. There are a lot of regulatory pieces here that are necessary. And I say that to just say, so I have an opinion, but I have a lot of opinions. So I guess, how do people feel like, should we get that Garrison presentation teed up for the 11th of January in the regular cycle of business, or do a special board meeting essentially for this only on the 18th? Does that make sense?
Mr. Avati, I just wanted to add, the reason that we wanted to add the additional meeting on the 18th is because we'll have at least 2 new board members coming on, and we felt that, their very first board meeting, kind of putting that in front of them would be a lot to ask. So if we add this additional meeting and dedicate it to the project applications, we can have our bond counsel, we can have our financial advisor here, and just make sure that everybody's comfortable before they approve them on the 25th.
I like that idea.
I think that makes a lot of sense to do a carve-out meeting on that. I think the date was the 18th, and just have that specifically focus for the bond. Yep. I think if you do it that way too, I think you might get a lot more community members that would tune in for that specific meeting for the bond as well.
I'm seeing enough nods to say, I think we want the 18th meeting. And well, that's great feedback. Okay. Well, wonderful. Then I yield back to Mrs. Neary.
Mrs. Sugars, did you want to give an ad hoc committee update?
Yes, I had included in the update last week that I had once again emailed the ad hoc committee. I know there was a desire of the board to make sure that they're kept in the loop. So I just wanted to keep you abreast of what I had sent them and invited them to participate in some of our upcoming events.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that's all we have for strategic planning. So then that'll bring us to our special action agenda. And with that, the superintendent recommends, and I move the following: action consent to approve items 17 through 20 with removal of item 20.2. Do I have a second? Ms. Schultz, are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
All right, I have opened up the online voting. So board members, you may cast your votes for items 17 through 20. If there are any abstentions, you can let me know and I will note them now. Okay, we have a unanimous yes vote.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sugars. Looks like that will bring us now to new business. Did we have anything under new business? Okay, that'll bring us to old business. Was there anything under old business this evening? Okay, going one, going twice. That will bring us to second public comment. And second public comment is for any item. I ask as usual, it's 3 minutes, and please state your full name and township. And I will start with any members of the audience, and then I will move to the line. Okay, seeing no members of the audience, I will then move to the line. Please state your full name and municipality. Oh, there's a number, so please state your full name.
Hi, my name is Jeff Podowitz, and I live in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'm reading from NJ Spotlight, something that I wrote many years ago. That's from an article, Profile Veteran Lobbyist Represents New Jersey Suburban Schools at the State House. And it's a comment that I made, I guess now 6 or 7 years ago. You remember what John Tremble said? I read it to you in 2010. School districts have blamed special ed for contributing to rising tax levies. In my district, that's Cherry Hill, the real reason for increasing tax levies has been the freezing and cutting of direct state aid to education. In large part, this is the freezing and cutting of direct state aid to the most at-risk students, and that includes kids with special ed. Though I should tell you, there was an article in Philadelphia Magazine in 2005, and Cherry Hill and some others blamed special ed. It was an in thing to do around 2005 and 2006, but you got to blame those special ed students. Just go back and look at the huge cuts that were done a few years ago. The state first published numbers that slashed category of special ed aid. A few days later, the state changed the numbers, slashing equalization aid and adding the difference to special ed categorical age. And that's why the special ed PTA approached the school board and said, you got to do something. And the school board decided, no, they weren't going to do anything. And the special ed PTA joined an amici brief as a result. But they were trying to get fair funding anyway. Why? Because the state was making the cuts too obvious, and we definitely had problems with federal maintenance of effort requirements. I am skipping. As for early identification of LD, it may be costing districts more money. Students that are high functioning with LD will pass the early grades, and when their grades drop, they will be placed in lower level general education classes. If the student is persistent and the parents support the student, and the student may get help privately, and IEP would provide accommodations and would help the student allow to stay and learn at a higher level, which is why kids with IEPs should be given support at the higher level so they can learn more, and they can, believe it or not. And the truth of the matter is that other LEDs, such as there's dyslexia, SLI, language learning problems, auditory processing, et cetera, are viewed as costly to districts because of volumes of students. So it is easier and cheaper.
Thank you, Dr. Podowitz. Okay, next we have Kristen Vignetta.
Hi there. I'll try this in the correct public comment. Two things. So first, a few members of Zone Exec met with Dr. Morton and Mr. Goldthorpe on 10/26 about adding and implementing tutoring at the middle and high school levels as students are now back in person full day. It was great to hear Dr. Mahan mention that tutoring tonight and funding it through ESSER funds. We mentioned in our meeting back in October that we were concerned that weeks move very quickly between now and the end of the calendar year, and that we'd love to have the tutoring done sooner than later. So we're just kind of wondering when the implementation of this tutoring will occur. Also, Mrs. Holmgren said tonight that the Start Strong results were available to teachers instantaneously. But part of our 10/26 meeting was asking about when teachers would have results, as the teachers that we had spoken with prior to that meeting didn't yet have them, nor did they know when they'd get the results. We found out that teachers were provided the results on 10/29 after our meeting. So can some clarification just be provided on that? And then second, a separate issue, I have two middle schoolers who personally are not allowed social media, but they do have text access. And I have seen a significant increase of negative online interactions between students via texts, screenshots of Snapchat and TikTok now, meaning post-remote and hybrid learning, as compared with pre-COVID. When I look at the timestamps, these are happening during the school day on a pretty regular basis. How is this allowed? Restorative discipline is something that the district has finally started to prioritize, and that is wonderful to hear. Doctors Morton and Mahan and I have emailed about this and the work the district is doing on changes to the student code of conduct. But we are now just a few weeks away from Thanksgiving. When can we expect the implementation of this new code of conduct to occur? And is it possible to make some quicker changes should that revised code of conduct still be months away from implementation? There is so much trauma that has been carried into this year for these students, and it needs to be addressed more thoroughly and more immediately than it currently is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Biglietta. Okay, next we have Ann Einhorn.
So I'm Ann Einhorn, Cherry Hill. I'm just curious, have we made any progress with CHEA and negotiations? Because I think that last year, this time of the year, that we settled the principal's contract, which wasn't due to expire until June of 2021. And if we haven't, I don't know where you are in the negotiation process. I understand that it's confidential, but at this point, our teachers and staff have worked with the contract since essentially July 1st of this year. So I'd like to know where perhaps the board is on this issue. I'd also like to comment on remote access by board members. I have some concerns about it, but I think the biggest concern I've had for a couple of years now is that when board members miss consecutive meetings, committee and Board of Education meetings, that there's no mention of it. And I think that should be something that comes from the top to find out where the board member is, because we, the public, depend on the board members. We helped elect you, some of you, and we deserve consideration as members of the public too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Einhorn. Okay, I don't see any other members in the audience or online. Oh, looks like we have one more. Alani Yares.
Alana Yaris, Cherry Hill. You can hear me, correct?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. It was mentioned at the previous public comment about the increase in HIBs that have been seen throughout the district. And I'm just wondering if the district can possibly offer alternatives for parents and adults in the district, because I think that a lot of the children personifying the harassment, intimidation, and bullying is also because of the parents and what is seen on social media. Specifically, there is a group that live tweets the board meetings, and they make snarky comments and rude things about board members and those who speak in the public. And I think if it was offered from the district, possibly parents and those who bully others as adults would attend and chime in and listen to what the district has to say and teach their children how to behave better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Carolina Bevitt.
Hi, Carolina Bevitt, Cherry Hill. I just wanted to urge the board to design a mask policy in anticipation of the mandate being lifted if the governor then puts the ball back in the individual schools' courts. Hopefully it'll be based on metrics. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other public comments. So Dr. Malash, I will turn it to you for superintendent comments.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. So just a couple of things that came up through the public comments. We are having discussions about masks and, if something is going to change. As I'm sure most people saw, Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania made an announcement that it'll go back to districts set aside effective January the 17th. Remains to be seen if anything, if and when anything will change in New Jersey, but certainly discussions that are ongoing that we've been having within the district. It's not a new topic of discussion. Discussion goes back to last summer that we were having and certainly has continued. So as there is information that's available, we will certainly share that with the public. And at some point, I'm sure will be a public discussion with the board at an upcoming Board of Education meeting. There were some comments tonight about HIBs. The Hibs, the number of them that appear in the board agenda. I would have to go back honestly and look from a couple of years ago, whether there's been an increase in the numbers from where we were a couple of years ago to where we are now. That it's, looking at the HIBs without knowing what the cases are and what's going on and what's being discussed, and that kind of thing. I can't necessarily say that it's a bad thing based on the numbers that we have. Certainly there's an increase in the HIBs from where we were a year ago when we were on remote learning, and even when we returned in the hybrid model, there were many fewer HIBs. We do know both anecdotally from being in schools and speaking with staff members and with students, with administrators and speaking with family members, that there are many children that are struggling with interpersonal relationships. That's a hard thing, to be back in a school building full time, to have to attend, in a way that focuses on what's going on in the classroom and in the building is a challenge. We all know as adults that there are many adults that are struggling with interpersonal relationships at this point, certainly with the impact of the pandemic, and many of our children are struggling as well. We have a number of tools and processes in place to support students and to provide them with opportunity to identify when there are concerns. We are finding that students are advocating for themselves and are speaking up. They're also advocating as upstanders for their peers and addressing when situations take place. And certainly there are parents that are involved that reach out to building principals, and we go through and follow those processes. A letter did come out from the middle schools yesterday, and asking again to continue to partner between the schools and home in working with students. Again, we have students in our middle schools, most of whom, not all, but most of whom are carrying some sort of cellular device, more often than not a smartphone that allows them the opportunity to be in a lot of places, in a virtual world from their phones. As students are struggling with interpersonal relationships in person, many students are struggling dramatically with interpersonal relationships online, where there are fewer limits, where there are fewer guidelines, and we are looking for families to partner with the schools to work together to help children to feel safe in what they're doing and to know, where limits are in terms of what should be shared, what should be written, and what should go on. Many of the issues that continue on into a school day can often be traced as our counselors and our administrators and our staff members go through and meet with students, can be traced as some sort of electronic or virtual interaction among students. So as the adults, as the grown-ups, we need to be able to come together and talk about it. We need to be able to come together and work towards the same end, which is supporting the young people that are in our district. One of the callers, somebody said about having parents involved. Certainly we would like to get our PTAs involved. We've done meetings in the past about HIB and about interpersonal relationships. And certainly we can look to do something similar, as we are moving forward. But we want to continue to support students. And this is not just a Cherry Hill-ism. We know the children, as we talk to our colleagues in South Jersey and across the region and across the country, these struggles are existing with children this age, and again, with many adults of this age as well. Podowitz, thank you for sharing the information about NJ Spotlight. I can tell you we are incredibly proud of the continuum of services that we offer for special ed students. There's a seated Board of Education, an administrative team, and staff members in the district who, to a person, I don't think you would find anybody that would ever try to target special education and say that's a problem financially or that's an issue for our district. We're incredibly proud of the program that we have and what we can offer to children and to families. And just another plug, as Mrs. Wilson talked about, somebody else brought up, Aramark is hiring. The information, check our social media. We'll see where else we can push that out. There are many positions that are available. As you heard Mrs. Sugars mention in terms of numbers, in terms of what they're looking for to run efficiently, they are right now running at 48% of their staffing. So we're looking for staff. We are constantly looking for substitute teachers. If you have a question, if you want to be a substitute, let us know. We're looking for educational assistants, both in full-time positions as well as during the lunch recess periods at our elementary schools. So if you're interested, please reach out to one of us, reach out to a building principal, talk to somebody in the district, and they'll put you in touch with our HR folks, and we'll get you into the right spot.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Malash. Okay, we do have items for our second executive session this evening. However, no action will be taken. I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session. Do I have a second? Oh, student matters, I'm sorry. And legal matters, apologies. Do I have a second? Ms. Schultz? All in favor? Okay, great. Thank you. Have a good evening.